Hello and welcome to section 3, Design and Deployment Considerations. In this section, we're going to first look at how you would approach a Horizon project, working through a number of project phases, and then look at specifically how to design a production-ready environment. So what are we going to cover in this section? Before we go right ahead and start to design or deploy our Horizon solution, we're going to just step back and discuss the key points you need to consider before tackling the project. We're going to start with the 3 project phases: project definition, proving the technology, and then designing for production. Once we've designed our project and chosen our solution, we can get into the specifics and look at what to deploy to cater for each use case in the organization. Next up, we will look at some of the reference architecture designs with the pod and block architecture, followed by the cloud pod architecture. Once we understood the core architecture design, we can then start to design an environment that's suitable for the organization, looking specifically at the vSphere elements of the design before moving on to the Horizon requirements. As well as the VMware elements of the solution, there are also other supporting infrastructure requirements, such as SQL databases, file servers, and Active Directory that you also need to consider, which we will cover in the supporting infrastructure and design video. We will then move on to look at how to design the virtual desktop machines and the hosting infrastructure to support them. Finally, we will bring all of these elements together and look at an example organization and how to design Horizon to fit the needs and requirements of this example organization. So now let's move on to phase 1 and let's look at how to define a project. Just before we look at the phase 1 in more detail, let's quickly outline the 3 project phases. To understand the project process, we're going to break it down into these 3 key phases. Let's have a look at those phases in a bit more detail, and the first phase being project definition. And in this phase, we're going to look at the business elements of the project, identifying both business and use cases. We will also conduct an assessment to understand the current environment, both from a user's perspective and also an infrastructure overview. The second phase is all about proving the chosen technology and that it delivers against all of your requirements. It also gives you the opportunity to test the solution in your own environment rather than just seeing a demo. The final phase is all about taking the information from the first 2 phases, along with any assessment data, and then designing an environment that suits your requirements. Don't forget, though, to make sure that you refer back to your project definition and success criteria as you work through the deployment to ensure that you remain on track with the original goals that were set out. So in this first video, we're going to start to look at phase 1 and discuss how to define your Horizon project, looking mainly at identifying business drivers, building a business case, desktop assessments, and defining the success criteria. So let's look at how to identify the business drivers and ultimately understand your needs and requirements. Before you jump headlong into your Horizon project, take a step back and ensure that you document what you are actually trying to achieve. More often than not, it can be very easy to get carried away with all the new shiny technological aspects of a solution, such as the installation and configuration of new hardware and software, and the end goal is either lost or becomes no longer relevant to the business. It may be an obvious point to make, but the key to identifying the business drivers is to really understand what you want to evaluate. By this we mean, is it a strategic decision based on the need to transform your organization with new working initiatives, or is there a more compelling event, such as the end of life of an operating system or an application? It may even simply be the need to reduce costs. Whatever the case, you need to get that nailed down, written up and documented on day 1, so the project has meaning and direction, and even more importantly, provide a baseline to refer back to when it comes to review time to gauge whether or not the project has been successful. Start by writing a document of requirements that lists the business needs, the current problems you need to solve, the vision, and any compromises and assumptions. As you progress through your project, you should regularly refer back to this document to keep yourself focused on the end goal. Next, we're going to look at building the business case. Once you've defined the drivers behind an initiative or the compelling event that kicks off the project and understood the high-level objectives, the next stage is to start building the business case around these. This requires you to go to the next level of detail and to start drilling into the specific areas the solution needs to address. To do this, you need firstly to understand the business strategy and then identify the key stakeholders for the project. You can then start to define the high-level requirements of each of the areas identified as drivers and also start to define user segmentation. For example, you can look at what different user types you have, how they work today, and what they need going forward. At the end of the day, it will be the end users that decide whether or not the project is a success and not you. So this leads us into the next session, the assessment phase. Once you have built your business case and validated it against your strategy and identified that there is a requirement for a new way of delivering a desktop or application environment, then the next stage is to run an assessment. So what is an assessment and what's involved? It comes down to several things that we're looking for. This includes examining your current desktop landscape by means of some form of desktop assessment so you can understand what is currently being delivered, to whom it's being delivered, and more importantly, how much resources that is taking up. The assessment is designed to build up a picture of what the current environment actually looks like. Some of the key metrics we're looking for include things like which users are using which applications and the usage of that application, as in resources, resource consumption, CPU, memory, disk, network, etc., login times, any unsuitable applications that aren't going to work with VDI, which operating systems are being used, and also look at some of the current delivery methods. For example, is there already some RDSH published applications, some VDI and physical, and so on. What you're ultimately looking to achieve is to create a baseline of what your environment looks like today. Then, as you move into defining the success criteria and proving the technology, you have a baseline as a reference point to demonstrate how you have improved current functionality and delivered on the business case and strategy. When it comes to assessment tools, there are a number of different third-party products on the market that you can use to conduct the desktop assessment, such as Liquidware Stratosphere Fit. And you are often able to use these services as part of a partners program to help you understand the information from the assessment. As well as the actual collecting of the assessment data, there are also a number of other points that you should take into consideration and look at. This will help you understand what some of the raw assessment data is telling you. For example, it might tell you that a particular user is unsuitable to have a virtual desktop due to the amount of resources they consume. However, when you speak to them, you may well find that whatever they're doing isn't going to be relevant when you move to VDI. Looking at what your actors usually do. While working in an IT department, you often have a good level of understanding of the tasks that users undertake and the software that they use to achieve these tasks on a daily basis. However, this can usually be a lot more complex than it may first appear. By undertaking a desktop assessment, you gather a granular level of understanding about the processes, applications, and experience the users are getting from their existing desktops. This will likely include the applications they use and, more importantly, those that they don't use, including the installed versions and capacity and performance requirements, as well as user experience metrics such as login times and application load times. When it comes to applications and understanding the applications in use, this is going to be a key element to move forward. This will have an impact in many areas, including the number of pools, pool design, application virtualization solutions, and potentially whether the desktop that gets assigned to the user can be non-persistent or they may need a persistent desktop. With the metrics gathered from the assessment, you'll be able to fully understand the current situation of your desktop estate. It's not uncommon to find many disparate versions of software, meaning potential security risks, and in other cases, key applications actually crashing on a regular basis. This information will help you build a business case for change and to help you prioritize your rollout to the users with the big security holes or the worst user experience. If you don't undertake a desktop assessment, it is likely that your desktops might be sized in one of two ways. The first would be by sizing your desktops based on the manufacturer's minimum recommendations, and therefore you will size based on the specifications of a physical PC, which will potentially be most cost effective, but is likely to cause you the most amount of problems. The flip side would be to base your desktops on the software manufacturer's recommended specifications. While your users might end up happy with this solution, it is likely that this is going to cost you the most and potentially mean that you will fail to get sign-off for your project. By undertaking the desktop assessment, you can actually understand what the performance curves look like throughout the working day. You are likely to see many dips and spikes throughout the day, such as login storms, AV scans, log-off storms, and other metrics such as increased internet usage during lunch breaks. If you work in an education environment, you may see many log-on and log-off storms during the day. It is important to understand this as you will need to ensure your solution is designed to meet these requirements. This information can be used to help guide you when sizing the relevant desktop pools, but bear in mind that potentially you are going to be making changes to the desktops between the assessment phase and deploying the VDI desktops. This may be something such as migrating from Windows 7 to Windows 10 or moving to a desktop that has been heavily optimized in comparison to an OEM installation of Windows. The assessment will have been performed on the previous version of the operating system and therefore may not give you 100% accurate information on the resources that will be required. Above all else, what matters is user experience, which is the measurement of how good or how poor the user's experience of using their desktop actually is. When you undertake a server virtualization project, if done correctly, the users will probably not even realize it's happened. With a desktop virtualization or any other EUC type project, it is more likely that they will realize a change has happened, and you need to ensure that this is a positive experience for the project to be successful. The measurements of user experience will be wide and varied, but these will include elements such as the boot time, application load time, login time, page load times, and other application issues. As you are progressing through the proof of concept, pilot and tuning processes, you need to ensure that the user experience is constantly improving. Failing to take user experience into consideration will result in a definite failure of the project. While the desktop assessment process is an important part of any EUC project, it should not replace the need to interact with your users. The benefit of human involvement is that you're able to pick up elements that simply would not be possible with software alone. Start by simply walking through your office, noting what the users are doing, what applications they're using, any accessories they have on their desks, the number of screens, if they're using laptops, PCs, and so on. Once you have this high level of understanding, consider booking meetings with key business leaders in each department to understand their needs, requirements, and the problems they have with the desktops today. You should also start considering who your department champions are going to be at this stage. So what are department champions? If you're going to make a short list of takeaway considerations from this course, department champions would be high on your list. A department champion is a user who is going to be the go-to person within the department for everything to do with their department's desktop design, testing and support. They don't need to be IT experts, but should have a desire to help you improve the overall desktop experience. You will work with these champions to help you with the design of their desktops, as they will be your first port of call for testing, and then testing again once you've listened to and implemented any of the feedback that's been given. By working with a department champion, you will have a sponsor within the department. They will have a sense of pride over what is being rolled out and will be there to help you sculpt the desktops and be the user on your side to explain why certain decisions have been made to the end users. Finally, we have the defining the success criteria phase. The key objective in defining the success criteria is to document what a good solution should look like for the project to succeed and become production ready. You need to clearly define the elements that need to function correctly in order to move from proof of concept to proof of technology and then into a pilot phase, before finally deploying into production. You need to fully document what these elements are and get the end users or other project stakeholders to sign up to them. It's almost like creating a statement of work with a clearly defined list of tasks. One important factor is to ensure that during this phase of the project, the criteria don't start to grow beyond the original scope. That means that any other additional elements should not get added to the success criteria, or at least not without discussing them first. It may well transpire that something key was missed. However, if you've conducted your assessment thoroughly, this should never happen. Another thing that works well at this stage is again to involve the end users. Set up a steering committee or advisory panel by selecting people from different departments to act as sponsors within their area of the business. Actively involve them in the testing phases, but get them on board early to get their input in shaping the solution from the outset. Too many projects fail when an end user tries something that didn't work. However, the thing that they tried is not actually a relevant use case or something that is used by the business as a critical line of business application, and therefore should never derail the project. I once saw a VDI project fail to the unresponsiveness of Microsoft Paint and a mouse, which knocked the project way off course while the issue was investigated. The upshot was that Paint was not used by anyone and so was totally irrelevant to the business or use case, but it still burned precious cycles while trying to enhance the performance. If we have a set of success criteria defined up front that the end users have signed up to, anything outside that criteria is not in scope. If it's not defined in the document, it should be disregarded and not be part of what success should look like.